Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, the number one source for news, analysis, and discussion on the Detroit Red Wings, the NHL, and all things hockey. Here are your hosts, Ryan Hanna, Brad Crisco, and Evan Lopsinger.
No festive sweaters? I'm going to wait until December 1st to put up the podcast Christmas tree, and you guys aren't going to join me with the festive sweaters?
I was not told that today was ugly Christmas sweater day.
Every day is now, Evan, from now until December 25th.
I forgot immediately after Halloween you turned into Buddy from Elf.
I do. Evan's not kidding. I actually do, and it goes to show the level of restraint I have and fear of what both of these guys ganging up on me at the same time could do to hold off until after Thanksgiving and December 1st hits to do any of this. But this is my time to shine.
We've got our fourth host finally on the podcast in studio, the Wingwell Podcast Christmas tree.
You always say you want more between you and Brad. You want him to be further away, so we put the Christmas tree in there.
Perfect.
We did get a Christmas miracle at the end of the game against Vancouver, or the end of regulation against Vancouver, because the penalty was killed by the Detroit Red Wings, and that's something that we can't say a lot, but it wasn't enough to get them through the game. Has Detroit considered, okay, I know we're all saying fix the PK. Have they considered just not taking penalties?
Can they not take penalties?
It seems more likely that they can do that rather than kill penalties at this point.
Not taking penalties is difficult. I think the better course of action here would be pay the referees an unholy amount of money so that they won't call the penalties that the Red Wings do take. It has worked for the Kansas City Chiefs for years. So if it works for them, there's nothing that makes me think it can't work for us.
Yeah, either black magic, which is what the Kansas City Chiefs do, or just straight up like mobile game pay to win. Like, I will pay a 7th round pick for 5 games worth of penalty kills at this point. Like, it is, it's bad. Anyways, you can imagine what we're going to talk about on this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we're going to be covering the 2 Detroit Red Wings games that have happened since the last time we spoke, the game against the New Jersey Devils and the one against the Vancouver Canucks. Neither of them ending favorably for Detroit, but with some interesting storylines to take away nevertheless. We're going to be talking about the results from those games and then the big topic, which is special teams. And they're very, very special in both directions right now. And then we're going to jump into a really exciting interview. You all know Pavel Datsyuk, the agent, the man behind Pavel Datsyuk, Dan Milstein, who is now an agent for seemingly the majority of the superstars from overseas, it seems like. He joined us for the first time ever on the Winged Wheel Podcast. It was Evan and I were ready to run through a wall after that interview. It was a great time. You guys will enjoy it.
Very motivational.
Oh my goodness.
There's no wasted time with that guy.
No.
It was great.
And he was very generous with his time too. I was like, I simply could not afford this conversation if this wasn't an interview.
No.
We'll come back to you with some NHL news before we jump into overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know 2 things. First, the Winged Wheel Podcast is primarily supported by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to support the show and join the Dub Club. You get access to benefits like our Patreon exclusive Discord, all of our giveaways, including 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game that we give away to our patrons, as well all of our bonus overtime episodes and any other bonus content we create. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to support the show. Secondly, Hot Stove Stories Rounding the Bases with Mike Tirico and guests in benefit of the Jamie Daniels Foundation is on Tuesday, January 14th. Tickets are on sale now. Go to jamiedanielsfoundation.org. Yes, Mike Tirico is hosting, but it also includes special guests Jason Benetti, Dan Dickerson, Len Kasper, Dan Schulman. It is a breakfast event. Great time. Highly encourage you to go. Again, jamiedanielsfoundation.org. We'll have more information for you on Winged Wheel Podcast nights before we jump into overtime. Let's get into the show. Detroit, it's weird because they played these 2 games and these didn't feel like bummer games, like no effort, no give a damn. Like, it felt like some things were going well for Detroit. You put out a tweet before the show, Brad, and we're going to talk about the penalty kill more concertedly after we cover the games, but it feels like the Red Wings would win the Stanley Cup if their penalty kill was actually good right now. Because these efforts weren't bad. They weren't perfect, but they weren't bad relative to what the Red Wings were doing for the rest of the season. And it's kind of a bummer that they walk away with 1 of 4 points.
120 plus minutes against two very good teams, and it's not tough to argue the Red Wings were the better team for a majority of those minutes. A heavy majority of those minutes, I would argue. And they got 1 point out of 4 to show for it. And yeah, you can blame a couple old problems. I think the Red Wings got a little guilty of parking the bus a couple times here, which we know historically is not a good idea with this team. And was the goaltending great? No, but it wasn't the reason they lost. It was okay. You could argue they outdueled the opponent's goalie in both games because Markstrom was bad and Lankinen wasn't great. But you can literally pin these 3 missed points almost entirely on the penalty kill.
Let's start with the New Jersey game. Vlad Tarasenko, who seems to be coming on of late, scores the power play goal. Lucas Raymond makes it 2-0, again, from Tarasenko and Kasper. Lucas Raymond, I think that made it, a 5-game goal streak for him, tied a career high for him. The game walked away from the first period, still tied 2-2. And so it started off really well for Detroit. I don't think either goalie was particularly good. Markstrom was terrible, actually, I'll say, for the Devils. Tyler Motte scores his first off of a redirect. The Ben Chiarot, that's the closest, that Ben Chiarot shot was the closest to like the Mark Stahl screw it piss missile from the top of the circle, because that was a knuckle puck coming towards him. And I saw that puck rolling, and Chiarot wound up, and I thought that is extremely difficult to do. And that thing whipped off of his stick. So Motte gets his first, and then 3 straight from the Devils. Justin Holl made it 5-4, but that's all she wrote for the Red Wings. 5-4 final in regulation for the Devils. And, you know, Dougie Hamilton on the power play, Timo Meier on the power play. That meant the Red Wings walked away from the first period. Instead of up 2 goals or even 1 goal, those 2 penalty kills that failed meant they walk away tied. And then in the third period, Jack Hughes makes it 5-3 to make that a 2-goal game in the third, again on the power play. The penalty kill failed them. And you have to go back not very far, like Brad said, to hear us talk about all the issues that the Red Wings have. But it doesn't feel like anything is more substantial or tanking them more concertedly than the penalty kill right now. Because, yeah, 5-on-5 scoring or parking the bus or goalies having an off night, whatever, that's just kind of like every team has some combination of those things. But the penalty kill meant that the Red Wings couldn't take advantage of a game where they were scoring. They were getting secondary scoring from guys who they needed, like Vlad Tarasenko. And, you know, Marco Kasper's heating up offensively as well. Berggren, you'll see in the next game, heating up offensively as well. And that didn't translate to a win because they just could not kill a penalty.
Well, it's deflating, right? The Red Wings go up 2-0 against New Jersey, who's one of the best teams in the league. And then near the end of the period, they give up a power play goal almost back to back, and they leave the first period tied 2-2. Like, they were in the driver's seat. They were controlling the game. And now they're going into the second tied. Like, there's massive amounts of momentum lost when you give up goals that way. And I mean, we're going to talk about the penalty kill overall, but when the other team goes 3 for 4 in a game, like, it's going to be very difficult for you to come out and win.
Especially like that game, Rasmussen had the thing with Hughes the last game where Hughes tried to barrel into him and Rasmussen sat him down, and we got that iconic picture. If this was a Devils podcast and we were all Devils fans, of course we would be saying you have to go after Rasmussen, that like the Devils did the next game. But what was funny to me was like everyone was talking about that from the Devils' perspective as if Rasmussen had wronged Hughes. Hughes skated directly into him. I don't get this whole... Anyways, so Rasmussen stood up for himself. I thought he held his own fine. And there was fire in that game too. They had the effort. And it felt a lot like the Red Wings had shaken off or had continued to shake off a lot of what ailed them not too long ago. So, you know, you walked away from that game feeling not great about how the second half went, but you're like, you see signs of life there. But against Vancouver, you can't let the penalty kill fail you. Against Vancouver, spoiler, 5-4 OT loss. We're recording minutes after that ended. In the first period, Berggren scored off of a rebound. Berggren, that's his 4th of the year, much like Kasper, continuing to put himself in the right places to get some production. And that secondary production is huge for Detroit. not just for goals on the board, but just for creating chances, right? Like the Red Wings ended this game with 31 shots on goal, and that's a big step up. And the Devils and the Canucks are two strong teams, like you mentioned, Brad. So it's massive. And then Jake DeBrusk on the power play. 1-1, 2-1 to start the second period. That was like the 5-on-3 that just immediately turns into the game being turned around. Like that, deflating is the right word, Evan. It just takes it out of you. You're playing well, and the floor falls out from beneath you.
There's a lot of guys in the Red Wings who don't play the penalty kill, and there's a helpless feeling to that when we're talking about deflating. You have nights where you're sitting on the bench and you know your goalie's fighting it. Bad goal goes in. Everybody's like, not again. Here we go. You know the Alex DeBrincats, the Vlad Tarasenkos of the world, the guys who don't play on the penalty kill, and both who ended up having big goals this game. See the penalty kill go out there. See them give up a key goal. And, you know, they're good teammates. I'm not saying these guys are going to wonder what the hell's going on, start cussing out their teammates and all that, but it's tough, man. When you know there's this part of your team that you rely on so heavily, that every team needs to rely on so heavily, and there's not a hope in hell they're going to do their job for a 60-minute game, it's tough mentally. So the one thing we probably should give the Red Wings some credit for as a group is having all these deflating moments in the last two games and not really letting it affect them. Like they played, again, mostly good games despite all the adversity they had on the penalty kill.
5-4 is the final. The Red Wings, after being down 2-1, scored an effective power play goal. Alex DeBrincat scored just as time expired from Larkin and Raymond from the left side there. That was his 10th of the season. We've been talking a lot about DeBrincat, who has been doing, again, like he'll miss his shots and he'll miss the net from time to time, but DeBrincat does, I think he's achieving the level of production that the Red Wings needed to see from him this year. And that's been a big boon. When they have been good, it's been partially because DeBrincat has been able to do that. Pius Suter made it 3-2 for Vancouver. Michael Rasmussen scores his first power play goal. What was it, in 5 years? I think it was.
Oh my God.
It's crazy how when you put him back into his bread and butter spot from when he was in juniors that he looks comfortable.
But the thing is, they tried it before and it didn't quite work. So it's like, I'm happy they're doing it now and he's been able to be effective.
Well, if you try things once and it doesn't work, it'll never work again.
That's right, Evan. Hey, do you want a job as an NHL head coach? Pick any team. You're qualified.
To quote Homer Simpson, remember, kids, the lesson is never try.
Michael Rasmussen scores on the power play from Raymond and Larkin. Raymond's point streak 7 games, tied for career high. And then that's 3-3. And then not long after, Vlad Tarasenko, Berggren, and Kasper combined for one of, if not the nicest goal of the Red Wings season so far. Start to finish from Tarasenko, ending with Tarasenko. Every single one of those guys deserves a ton of credit, and I could talk for 20 minutes about every part of that goal. It's not very often you find a goal with a secondary assist where that guy has an argument for the nicest part of the play.
First point, yes, you're correct. That was the sickest goal of the year for the Red Wings. Second point, this is exactly what the Red Wings haven't been getting all year. A clean transition that leads directly to offense. Like, it was a masterclass. The pickup off the pass from Tarasenko to Kasper was sick. He just taps it through his own legs, immediately puts it up to Berggren. And that one-touch pass from Berggren, that's not a simple play. That's a tough play to feed it cross seam in the O-zone with no time. And then
Tarasenko's left-handed too, right? Like he catches it on his strong side. That is a tough pass to get because it's coming all the way across your body, and then he basically catches and releases. It was a thing of beauty.
And just enough delay on that shot to let Lankinen overslide and hit high glove. Like that goal was just sick.
Marco Kasper's been almost exactly what we thought he would be if things were going well, right? Like anyone who was like Marco Kasper's going to come in and be a first line forward, and that's the kind of offense he's going to bring, and he's going to be, a dynamo scoring like Lucas Raymond. That wasn't realistic, and it wouldn't be fair to pin on him. But we were saying if Marco Kasper just does the right things, plays the game the right way, pick your coaching adage or meaningless platitude, that genuinely applies. And then we said that will give him the comfortability and the space to show that he has offensive ability. We saw him do that with the Grand Rapids Griffins when he got comfortable. And it's not just, getting to the hard areas and winning pucks and banging them home, which he can do. It's also those flashes of skill and what he did in neutral ice with that pass and moving the puck up. Like, that was a good little moment to remind everyone, in case anyone foolishly forgot that Marco Kasper has that element. It's the perfect kind of secondary offensive talent that you want on your team.
Him and Berggren have really started to pick up, and their production is now coming. Like, they've looked good all year, but the counting stats weren't there. And now they're really starting to add to the score sheet. I think they have been, outside the big three, two of the best players on the Red Wing.
And Vancouver scores at the end of the game, more or less 3 minutes, 20 seconds left, I think it was. And then in overtime, Jake DeBrusk finishes the hat trick, and Detroit loses 5-4 in overtime. I think it was like one shot on goal between the last 10 minutes of the third and overtime combined, if I saw that correctly, in and around one shot. So like you said, Brad, a little bit of parking the bus going on. I do look at that, and I look at sections of the New Jersey game where New Jersey took over, and it's like, yeah, at some point you are playing really great teams, right? And this isn't a great roster on paper. So to me, it's, if the Red Wings are going to be competitive against good teams, this is how the flow of the game is going to go. It's not realistic based on what we've seen so far in the Red Wings roster as we know it stands to be dominant for 60 minutes. So we'll come out and say, yeah, the Red Wings didn't play a full 60, but this doesn't feel like the problem today. This feels like the problem is the massive imbalance in special teams for the Red Wings. Before we dive into the special teams, though, quickly, Cam Talbot left this game, and Ville Husso came in relief. Cam Talbot leaving almost unexpectedly, and you saw on a replay he was stretching something. The Red Wings announced he wasn't going to return. It was lower body. Ville Husso did well in relief, in my mind. Like, he was more solid than I think most everyone was expecting from him. But that's something that the Red Wings are going to have to hope doesn't persist. I think Ken Daniels said on the broadcast that they're expecting Alex Lyon to be out for another week or so, give or take. And if it has to be Husso for a while here, this could get sticky for Detroit in net. Like, they are going to really need Cam Talbot's injury to be short-term, because
I refuse to be a doomer on this because we lived through a season of James Reimer.
And there were games that he stole too. So we've lived through times where Ville Husso was great too. So maybe he's been great in Grand Rapids. It's just the NHL level. So for the rest of this game, not the problem.
Here's the optimistic view. I'll branch off of Evan not being a doomer. Husso plays well. He proves that he is capable of carrying at least a bit of the load. Cam Talbot comes back in relatively short order, but after Husso plays his stretch. They have 3 goalies again capable at the NHL. Trade value.
There you go. There you go. You take it. Okay, now let's get into special teams, because the Red Wings power play is lethal. It has continued to be good. It's demonstrated that it's not an aberration. Like, as it stands, even when they had that 10 power play stretch where they needed to reshuffle some things, they did it and they're right back at it. Like, they're out there and you believe in them and you're like, yeah, that is a threat to score. The penalty kill right now is tracking to be, it's not a full 82 game season yet, but it's tracking to be among the worst in recorded NHL history with how bad they are. What'd you say, Evan? 5 for 8 was the opponent's power play percentage against Detroit the last couple of games?
The Devils and Canucks combined power play went 5 for 8, which would avoid you academic probation in university. Not that I would know, but I've been told that is what that would be. So that is, I mean, those teams they're thrilled, but as a Red Wings fan, I am not thrilled.
And it's only 25% of the way through the season. It is very, very important to state that first before the second statement here, which is, Ryan alluded to it. Statistically, the Red Wings are on pace to have one of the worst PKs in recorded history. He was generous. It's not one of. They are on pace for the worst penalty kill in recorded history. I think the next worst team was the 1980 LA Kings. If your defense is comparatively worse to any defense in the 1980s, let alone all of them, that's not just bad.
There were teams that had penalty kills that were better than the Red Wings, and the goalies didn't even know what the butterfly was yet.
Literally, yes. The expansion Atlanta Thrashers penalty kill
who had Ilya Kovalchuk probably out on the penalty kill.
There's 75% of the season to regress to the mean and not be historically bad.
You know how good their penalty kill is going to have to be to regress to the mean?
Borderline elite. My goal now is not the worst of all time. That's the benchmark for this penalty kill. So again, the point being there's lots of time. And if you're on pace to be historically the worst in history through 3 or 4 games, that's one thing. That's just a fluke, a series, Lemony Snicket series of unfortunate events. This is a trend. This is 25% of your season. This is no longer a fluke, an aberration. It's a huge problem that should result in big changes, whether that's personnel, coach, system. Something dramatic has to change with this penalty kill.
If you think about how good the goaltending has been and how good the power play has been, regardless of the parking the bus in the third period, which we have droned on and on and on about, regardless of how, bad the 5-on-5 offense is and especially was for the first while there, and regardless of how, absent the secondary scoring was, and regardless of how bad the defense is, this team is... How many standings points are the penalty kills worth here? Like, what? This team is genuinely in the wild card mix, maybe confidently right now.
At least 3 points this weekend.
Like, it would be an ugly way to get there, but this team would be far, far more competitive in terms of results and points on the board. We would still have all the same concerns, but at the end of the day, it wouldn't be, and this leads to the Red Wings being, in the mix for the bottom of the division. Things are still tight. It's not like the season's over in terms of points, but we would be saying, hey, these are still things you have to work out for the long term, but the Red Wings are still getting the results they need for their goals this season, which was to be competitive for a wild card spot. Just make the penalty kill average, and they are getting more points on the board, period.
Yeah, if you want to say conservatively that it's 3 points that the penalty kills cost the Red Wings, then that puts them 1 point out of the wild card with a game in hand on Philly. And that's just the 2 games this weekend we're talking about for points.
When you were talking about elite power play, above average goaltending, if they could just get middling 5-on-5 and middling penalty kill, that got the New York Rangers to the conference finals last year.
I don't know if it was in a group chat or on the podcast, but I remember saying close enough, welcome back, worst version of last year's New York Rangers. It's like a very scaled down version of it, but man, let's dive into what's wrong with the penalty kill to start, because I know there's a lot of saying, oh, just fix the penalty kill, fix the penalty kill. Why don't you talk about what you would do? There are very few things in hockey where you can say, hey, just do that better. And it's reasonable to expect any NHL team to just be able to do that. Hockey's hard. NHL hockey is hard. You don't just go out there and say, I'm going to do this system and skate here and do this with my stick, and all of a sudden it's going to work. No, the NHL is faster, harder in terms of hits and physicality. You have less time than ever, less space than ever. It's hard to excel. The penalty kill is the only area where you can make the argument to say any team should be able to do this well with the right strategy, coaching, execution, no matter the personnel. You would have to be like, no, even lottery teams can do this with the personnel, because they're usually loaded up with guys who are at least good at this part of the ice. They're complacent, they're out of position, they miss assignments, they don't pressure the puck, which in the modern NHL we're seeing more and more, if not completely, that you need to force mistakes, pressure the puck, pressure the perimeter, especially if they're going to hang on to it out there. Don't give them time and space, and don't let them collapse in. Like, they don't do any of that. And they just sit there in their shell. And then even when the puck gets into the crease, it's like there's no confidence that they're going to be able to collect and clear. And they can't break it out either.
I love the part where you said that in today's NHL, time and space is at an all-time low. Have you watched the opponent's power play against the Red Wings? They have all the time in the world. I was really watching it closely against Vancouver today. They play a passive box, which, one, I hate that strategy on the PK to begin with. But if you're really good in coverage, it can work, because you're going to give up a lot of shots, but they're generally going to be perimeter shots, which most penalty kills will tell you, if all you're giving up is perimeter shots, that's a win. If nothing's coming from the home plate area, you'll take that every time. Yeah, every once in a while, one will get tipped in on you or a rebound might get smacked in, whatever. The percentages are going to play out in your favor. The problem with the Red Wings and their passive PK is they're not good in coverage. They miss assignments way too often. They have to play a penalty kill to their personnel. Obviously, a lot of this is going to be pinned on Petry and Chiarot, and I want to make clear it is far from a just those two problem. Very far from it. But even if you want to focus on those two, what are Petry and Chiarot good at? What are their strengths as a defenseman? They're big, they have length, and they're mobile. They move well for their size, which in theory means they can probably be effective in aggression. They can close time and space quickly. They don't do that. And then you factor you're playing these guys in not their strong suit, and both of them, I would argue, their biggest weakness is coverage. These guys lose their man or their position all the time. It's a bad formula. And then if you look at what Larkin would be good at, who's arguably their best penalty killer, he's fast, he's aggressive. Play that style of PK. I understand not every player on this PK is going to thrive in that system. I get it. You're probably yelling at me, Andrew Kopp can't do that. JT Compher's probably not going to be good at that. I agree. But what you're doing now isn't working. Try anything else. Anything else. The passive penalty kill is not working. Not even a little. Dial it up. Take away the time and space. Much like there are going to be issues where you're going to give up goals in a coverage PK, even in an effective coverage PK. Yeah, if you're over-aggressive, every once in a while, you're going to lose a man backdoor or he creeps in on the soft side and you're going to give up a goal.
That happens right now in a zone defense penalty kill anyway.
Exactly. That's ultimately my whole point is it's not working as it is. Try something else. But, and again, the Red Wings are not the 23-24 Florida Panthers. But their penalty kill was a masterclass. They suffocated you. And even after that game where they did it to Detroit last year at the WWP event, Maurice came out and said, we're going to give up 2 or 3 really good chances a game. Like grade A, breakaway, backdoor. We know that. And if our goalie gets them, we're going to win. The Red Wings need to adopt that mentality. Like, yeah, be aggressive. You're going to blow it every once in a while, but the percentages should increase. Yeah, the ones that they give up may look worse because it's like, wow, how did nobody see that guy creeping in from the right side back door? But they're going to be few and far between. And it's going to be a lot fewer and further between than what they're giving up now.
The shame about this, yeah, you're giving up goals, you're giving up standings points. It also changes like the way you have to think about the game when you manage it. Like as a coach, like Derek Lalonde challenging that goalie interference call against the Devils. Yeah, you're not going to get all of those, and whether or not he should have is a question that needs to be asked, of course, but it's so much more pressure. Like if you're the video coach or whoever saying, yeah, go ahead and challenge that call, you no longer have a reasonable expectation that that penalty is going to be killed, because right now it feels like an automatic goal against Detroit, which is what it was. Like you can't have it be this bad. You're not a strong team talent-wise. We know what the Red Wings are. If they're going to get in, it's going to be scraping and clawing for every point. They have enough talent to make things interesting, but you can't have a major facet of your game be this bad unless you're going to find out a way to miraculously never take penalties. And that's just not the modern NHL. It's just not the way games are going to go. So wherever this is managed, whether it's Boughner, whether it's Lalonde, whether it's a combination of coaches, whatever it is, this needs to change in terms of execution. Yes, it's on the players, but the strategy as well, because it's just beating your head against the wall, trying nothing, and it's pulling the floor out from beneath this team in games where they are able to make it interesting. Okay. There's a lot we can talk about here. I wish we could talk more about, things that are going well for Detroit too, but in the interest of time, let's take a quick break to hear from the sponsors of the Winged Wheel podcast. And when we're back, an interview with none other than Dan Milstein, NHL agent of Pavel Datsyuk and so many others. You're going to want to hear this one. Enjoy. This episode of the Winged Wheel podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown. So next time you're watching hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for Detroit, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer, and it's great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode or the one you see on your screen to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. NHL player agents are some of the more under-recognized movers and shakers in the NHL world, and maybe the most unique and prolific in his space is Dan Milstein. Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, Dan. Appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
So, Dan, obviously you are an NHL player agent, but that you have so much more to your story, which we're going to get into today. And I think we have to start with what Red Wings fans will immediately think of when they think of Dan Milstein, the agent, which is Pavel Datsyuk and Pavel Datsyuk coming to North America and your role in Pavel's career. And that's obviously front of mind right now because of Pavel's Hockey Hall of Fame induction. So what was the whole experience of the last month or so with Pavel's induction, the honor the other night against the New York Islanders? How was that for you from your perspective in the role you played in Pavel's career?
It's been very busy the last couple of months. Ever since Pavel was inducted, we have had numerous Zoom calls with the Holl. The whole organization is a top notch. I mean, they had scheduled us by the minute, and Kelly and all those guys at the Hall of Fame did a phenomenal job. But obviously, Pavel wanted to start working on his speech immediately. I thought he did a phenomenal job with his acceptance speech, which obviously took countless hours, days, weeks, and months in preparation. And to be honest with you, there was another gentleman or a number of guys, the speakers, and I thought that Pavel was one of the better speeches. So it was very difficult to be better than Jeremy Roenick. JR did a phenomenal job, but I thought Pavel was right behind, and he was one of the best speeches of the night. So I'm very grateful, thankful for the experiences that I was able to live. But it was a lot of work, and I'm glad that my close friend and client was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and the whole experience was top notch.
There's going to be more on Pavel and your ties to players like him and the Red Wings in general later on. But I think a funny little moment here for the listeners is, I shot you a message after the Hall of Fame game, the night in Detroit where they won against the Islanders. And I said, congratulations. It must have been nice to see the win for Pavel there. And you noted for me, you're like, well, I had a client in the other net who was looking for his 100th win in Ilya Sorokin.
So it was a busy night. Alexander Romanov is my other client. He was playing in his 300th game, I believe, that night. And obviously, Ilya was looking for his 100th win, and he was doing so well until the last 10 minutes of the game. And unfortunately, it didn't happen that night for him, but it did happen eventually. So, and then most importantly, Pavel had a great night, a great experience. The day started with him coming into the Red Wings practice, shaking everybody's hands and meeting some of the players. Obviously, spent some time with Vladimir Tarasenko one-on-one. Then after that, we went up to Steve Yzerman's office, where Pavel signed a one-day contract to forever retire as the Red Wing, which was very, very important for Pavel. And then from there on, we just had too many activities to count, and we ended up at the game.
We have a few listeners who might not be all that familiar with your career path and your path to America. It's such a fascinating story. You were born in Kiev in 1975. What do you remember growing up at that time within the Soviet Union?
I mean, I immigrated as a political refugee back in 1991 at the fall of the Soviet Union. We boarded the plane in the Soviet Union in December of 1991. And when I touched down in the United States, the Soviet Union was no longer on the map. So the movie Terminal with Tom Hanks technically was that's kind of what we went through, because we were citizens of no country, but we had to surrender the passports. And a friend of mine at the airport gave me 17 cents, which I hid in my sock. And so I came to America with basically one suitcase full of memories and 17 cents to my name. And I am now looking back, it was the best 17 cents investment. But most importantly, along the way, I've learned too many valuable lessons. And so it doesn't matter how bad things get, you just keep on working, fighting, and never give up. I haven't called in sick since 1998, dead or alive. I always work. I'm always available. I answer the phone calls. You try me. Within seconds, you get a response each and every time. And so one of the golden rules that I live by is treat others the way you want to be treated. So every day I wake up, shave, put a suit on, and I shake hands, kiss babies, but I never forget where I come from, and I always treat others the way I want to be treated.
So you land in the United States of America in 1991. What was it like coming to a foreign country where you didn't speak English? It was completely different than what you were used to. What do you remember about that time?
I mean, coming in as a young kid, no money, not speaking the language, not knowing what tomorrow brings. It was very difficult. I mean, obviously, I went to Huron High School in Ann Arbor, didn't understand what the hell the teachers were saying. It was so difficult, so hard. Obviously, shortly thereafter the arrival, we got a little place in the subsidized projects in Ann Arbor. So got my ass kicked a few times, got my tires slashed a few times. Been there, done it all. Shortly after, I was fortunate, and I say fortunate, to get a job at McDonald's. For most, working at McDonald's is beneath their dignity, but for me, it was a lifeline. It was an opportunity to be somebody someday. So I was so appreciative of the chance and opportunity. I worked from 5 o'clock in the morning until the high school, 8 in the morning. Then I went to high school. And after that, I came back and finished my shift. I was so appreciative that I painted the golden arches behind the bed in the projects where we lived at the time.
So growing up, you said you got your ass kicked a few times. That must make it so easy to walk into a negotiating room with an intense GM who wants to put on a rough face. You're like, I've seen this before. There's nothing you can do that'll scare me.
You know what? I use a little bit different technique in negotiating contracts. But yes, I've learned a lot along the way. That's for sure.
So Gold Star Financial Group is a company that you started, which obviously now is the backbone to the agency work that you do, but it didn't start as an agency. So talk to us a little bit about your entrepreneurship and how you built this business. So
there was back in 1992 when I was just 17 years old. There was a McDonald's All-American competition, and so every job I had, and especially McDonald's, I treated like it was my own business. And so I learned everything about there is to learn about the McDonald's restaurant. So I knew all the cooking times, the holding times, what the contents of different things. And so there was a McDonald's All-American competition. I barely spoke English, but the deal was whoever won the competition got to go into the management training program. I won the competition, and I was an assistant manager before I graduated from high school. And so I've had numerous other jobs. What haven't I done? You know, I can change tires, replace engines. I can cut lawns. I've done everything there is to do, or at least it feels like. And so, for me, while I was in college, I was taking the connecting bus in downtown of Ann Arbor, and there was a big, beautiful building where well-dressed men and women would go in and out. And one day, 19 years old, I walked in and asked for an application. And guys, to this day, I have no idea why they gave me a chance. It was the bank. I had no idea what the hell I was going to be doing. So I went to the Salvation Army, and $2 later, I was a proud owner of a suit and a tie, and I was a banker at last. And I just fell in love. I think it might have been the first love of my life. It was the banking, was writing loans for people. And so I took it to the next level. I had executive jobs fairly at the young age and in banking, but when I was 24, I left with $3,500 in savings, and I started this tiny little company in the closet. I rented a space that was used as a closet by a AAA insurance, And that's how GoalStar was born. Now, right around the same time, I was flying to Connecticut, and it was April of 1999, and I ended up getting this Mortgage Banker magazine. And each April, they feature top 200 out of 500,000 people in a banking space in mortgages. And I looked at it and I said, someday I'm going to be number one. And when I do that, I'm going to write a book how I did it. You should have your dreams so high that sometimes you feel embarrassed telling your friends about it. It was one of those moments. And so fast forward, I did become number one out of 550,000 people for numerous years. I've been, ever since I started the company, I personally have been in the top 20 nationally. And I built the company to, at this point in time, GoalStar, we're at 58 offices. We're serving clients virtually all over the United States. I personally stepped away. Now the company is managed by AJ Frenchie and by our senior leadership. All those guys have been with the company 15 plus years, been working with me hand in hand. Joe Sellers and AJ Frenchie, Eric Schultz, and many other guys that I'm forever grateful for everything that they do for the mortgage company, so that I can concentrate on other things such as making the movie The Russian Five, obviously running the agency and doing many other things. So I still don't know, guys, what I want to do when I grow up. And so I just, every morning I wake up and I keep chasing my dreams.
So you've built this behemoth of a financial group company. Everything's, going well. How did you branch into the player representation business, and how does that all sort of tie in with Pavel Datsyuk?
Sure. It's actually back in the late 90s. I was in the top 15, 20 nationally out of all those 550,000 people. And so naturally, I was doing business with a lot of celebrities, a lot of athletes. There was this kid who was told no 657 times. He was not drafted the first year of eligibility. He wasn't drafted the second year of eligibility, and he went 171st in the sixth round, final year of his eligibility. He didn't know he was drafted for a week or so after the draft. When a friend of his shows up to the locker room and says, "Hey, you've been drafted," he goes like, "I don't believe you. This is before the internet." So the very next day, this other guy brings a newspaper, Russian newspaper, and shows it to this guy that, "Hey, you've been here. Look, you've been drafted." 2 years later, this kid shows up to a training camp, and the team had at least 10 future Hall of Famers, maybe more. And shortly after he makes the team, the general manager, the assistant general manager, somebody pulled him aside and said, "Hey, you're staying here." And somebody on the team gave him my business card. They said, "Hey, you call this guy. He can help you with everything you need, with a housing, apartment, money, whatever you need, and you can trust this guy." And so this kid called me. Now, obviously, fast forward, that is Pavel Datsyuk. I was his banker at first. I was his friend. I was his agent. Every speech that he's ever delivered was, I helped him to write it. He practiced on me standing in the middle of the hotel room in his underwear in Toronto, later in Las Vegas, practiced on me. And then later at night, he would go on a stage and accept yet another award and read the same speech. And so I was fortunate to be by his side from the very first speech to the very last Hall of Fame speech. And so the entire business was built around Pavel, the agency, because Pavel was the only client for a very long time as I was building other businesses and other things. And in 2015, when Pavel decided to go back home, I had to decide whether I was going to open up the floodgates and work with everybody else, or just shut this thing down and continue, working in the mortgage space and do other things that I was doing at the time. So obviously, spoiler, I ended up jumping both feet into this thing.
So obviously, like you said, the floodgates opened, and now the active contracts that you have, I'm looking at your page here, is Nikita Kucherov, Vasilevskiy, Sergachev, Evander Kane. We mentioned before Ilya Sorokin, Artem Zub, and this is a long list, Dan. And this doesn't happen unless we know from 15 minutes of talking to you here, you're passionate about it, because this is an extensive client list with really, really high-end names that you and your agency represent. So, I know that you obviously knew the game from what you learned with Pavel Datsyuk, but this is a whole different world. So how did your world change after you decided to take that step?
You see, I'm in this business not because they need you financially, but because I want to, and that's a huge difference. Same thing I did in the mortgage business, serving thousands and thousands of clients myself and leading the guys around me as well. When the phone call rings, it doesn't matter what it is that you're doing. You answer on the very first ring each and every time. And so sometimes I would go get a colonoscopy and I would go down under a knife with the phone under my pillow, finding the surgeon or whoever. And as soon as I wake up, I check my messages. If you ever call me, if I don't answer within 15 minutes, you should be calling 911 reporting a missing person. So I'm always available. But because I built the business around Pavel, we did things that others just don't do. We basically manage your entire life. So you just basically play hockey, and we handle everything else for you, something that is basically unseen. The last 3 years, we are one of the top agencies for the draft. This past draft, I had 3 kids in the top 10. Top 33, I had 6 clients, and there was 16 guys drafted. It was 16 or 18 the year before, and so on. So not only we have a very good, we're one of the top agencies. We're in and I believe if you look at some of the ratings per contracts, I am in the top 5 or something along those lines as well. But, I don't care about the ratings. I don't care about that. I mean, contract is only a little tiny fraction. And if you look at my Instagram page, you would think that all I do is a workout with the Stanley Cup up and down every single day. But truly, it is less than 1% of everything that we do. The rest of the time, you're just basically, you have a client who is healthy scratch. You have a client who's injured. You got to get second opinions. There's so much that is happening at any given time. And it is a truly 24 hours job. So a lot of people approach me. They want to be agents too, right? So I get guys that write me letters, guys that approach, and they'll, usually they start out by saying, I'm the biggest fan. And my message to you, just be the fan, because in being an agent, you lose all those wonderful moments. Walking into that old Joe Louis arena, smelling that beer, just cheering on one team, cheering on your favorite players. When you are an agent, you're cheering for your clients. It is because you see the other side. You don't see somebody scoring a goal. You see all those other things. And for every Stanley Cup, there's a guy on the other team who hasn't won one. So the same thing this year. I had clients on both sides. When you have clients, I believe in 28 out of 32 teams, the chances are while somebody is celebrating, somebody else is hurting. And so you have to give more to the people that are hurting than the people that are celebrating.
So, I mean, like you said, there's so much that goes into being an agent. And I think if you could walk the listeners through what just the negotiation process is. Like you said, it's not all the contracts are just a small fraction of it, but what does a typical negotiation process look like? Let's say for a notable player, one of your higher end players, is it, you walk into the room and the GM is sitting across from you? Is it conversations with other people in the management team? Is it kind of messages back and forth? What does it look like normally?
Well, it depends on the team. For example, and so sometimes contracts are done in a matter of 10 minutes or less for high-end guys. Wow. And sometimes something that what seems to be a very easy deal goes on for a year. Sometimes it goes nowhere. I'm always open for business. I'm always willing to listen. I'm not the guy who's going to talk to one side and then disappear for 2 months. So usually the way contracts are done is that you sit down with, obviously with the client and his family. Because look, wives are involved, the parents sometimes are involved. It depends on the situation. And then so, we basically come up with comparable players, stats. You look at the salary cap, you look at the CBA, the expirations. There's so much that goes in. And sometimes, usually you have an information packet that is, anywhere between 35 to 50 pages that basically covers what the media is saying about the player, what the coaches are saying about the player, what the general manager is saying about the player. So that in the negotiations, when they start talking negatively, you can pull up the paper clips, right, from the past. Then you look at the stats, you look at the them stats, you look at all kinds of stuff, and then you just basically chip it away. I'll give you an example. Nikita Kucherov's contract. I lived in Northville, Michigan at the time. Steve Yzerman came to my house. I had one face-to-face meeting in my house with Steve Yzerman, July. It must have been July of the year, a year before his second contract was expiring, and then we basically hammered out all the other details over the next 2 weeks, and we had the deal done. For Andrei Vasilevskiy, July. So it's an interesting story. It was in June, a year before his second contract was expiring. That year, Andrei Vasilevskiy and Nikita Kucherov would frequently come to my house on the weekends. I live in Florida, live on the ocean, about 3 hours away from them. And so they would work hard 5 days a week, and they would come on a weekend. And so Julien Brisebois, the general manager of the Tampa Bay Lightning, jumped on a plane. He was in Montreal and flew into Florida. I went to West Palm Beach Airport to pick him up while Nikita and Andrei were fishing. And so I brought Julien. We went all to lunch, and then we hammered out Andrei Vasilevskiy's contract in my house. And so, which at the time made him, was $9.5 million matching contract to Nikita Kucherov. So that particular deal took maybe 2 or 3 phone calls prior, and then a big meeting at my house, and then he walked out with a big contract. But at the same time, there are deals that take forever to do. And so I can't go too much into the detail, but the preparation. And so I have 2 analysts that work for me. And so every single night they update stats. Joe Stebbins is one of them. And poor Joe has to stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning every single night. And so he basically runs the stats for us. So my presentations are updated daily. Should I get a phone call from the general manager from one of the teams, I'm ready to go. I got all of my stats. Everything's been updated. I have a big, nice presentation, and I know exactly where we stand with our clients every single day. So kudos to Joe. He's done an unbelievable job for us.
Typically, have you found that the large value contracts have been more difficult to get done and get signed as opposed to the smaller deal contracts, or is it more so a player by player basis or team by team basis?
Guys, there are some deals that are done on a napkin in a matter of 2 seconds, and then there are deals. I mean, Mikhail Sergachev. I did that deal like literally 2:00 so I landed in Moscow for scouting, and I get a phone call from Julien Brisebois summer 2 years ago, and it is 2:00 in the morning. It's raining. It's cold, even though it's summertime. And so he wants to talk contract. So, who cares that it's 2:00 in the morning where you are? And who cares that it's raining? And then you're outside, you got to take a phone call and you got to do the deal. So that deal we put together fairly quickly. But there are a number of deals, to every successful contract. Usually there are other ones that take forever. And sometimes it's not just me, the agent. Obviously, I'm in business to close the deals. We know where the market is. We know what it is that we want. Sometimes clients too. Sometimes clients refuse to stay in certain areas. They want to be moved elsewhere, or perhaps they're willing to give a discount. And you march in orders, do whatever you can, get the deal done before the deadline because I don't want to be traded. So you take client wishes very seriously, and you work towards that. So there isn't one size that fits all, and you just never know. But I'd be honest with you, there are some deals you think are very easy cookie cutters. They're the ones that take forever.
Do you find that, obviously your client list isn't exclusively Russian or European, but do you find that, clients from overseas need to be advocated for more so than, their North American counterparts in terms of recognition or remuneration?
It's obviously the cultural differences do exist, and sometimes it's more difficult, especially for the guys out of Russia over the last couple of years. But with that said, NHL teams, look, they draft the best players. With Russians, obviously due to the fact that virtually no NHL team is going to Russia. To which the tournaments, obviously Russians, unfortunately, for the time being, cannot compete at the international level. So it makes things a little bit difficult. But with that said, this summer, I did an unprecedented thing. I had a camp in Fort Lauderdale before the draft. And so I brought all of my prospects that were going into the draft. Some guys that went in the first round probably would have ended up going in the second or third or fourth round, sliding later because they haven't been seen. But I had virtually the entire NHL community at my Florida Panthers training facility at our Gold Star camp. And as a result, guys have seen Ivan Demidov for the first time, which I think Demidov is the best, is maybe, I don't want to talk about too much about the guys that have gotten drafted before him, but in my opinion, he's probably one of the most talented. And in 5 years, we can look back and say, maybe he should have been drafted in a different spot. Demidov went 5th overall. He couldn't skate because of the prior injury. Obviously Artem Levshinov was a 2nd overall pick. People have seen plenty of Zane Perek, who went to Calgary in the top 10. But there was the number of other guys. Igor Surin went to Nashville 21st. If he wasn't at our camp, very likely he would have been a 2nd or 3rd round selection. So we're going to continue bringing, if the NHL cannot come to me, I'll bring my guys to the NHL. And so we'll continue doing the same things to promote our guys. And so bottom line is that, as long as you're being honest, truthful, and work, with the teams and with the clients, you can always find a happy medium. And as a result, perhaps, sometimes, when teams draft, obviously they go for the best talent, but, they also look at, who the agent or the agency is, for sure, 100%.
Everyone knows that the arbitration process for players can get, a little bit fiery at times. Relationships can be soured between player and team. What have your experiences been with that process?
Look, this past summer, I was very close, a day away, with Kirill Marchenko of Columbus Blue Jackets. In the end, we did a fair deal for both sides. The arbitration cases are... believe me, you don't want to end up in an arbitration room. But with that said, if you have to do it, you will do it. Obviously, there's a huge help from the NHLPA, from the outside attorneys, and then also there's a lot of work that agents and clients have to do. Obviously, if you can agree, it is always best to agree to the number. And but with that said, like I said, there isn't one size fits all. We basically keep, while the players are hopeful to get contracts resolved beforehand, us as agents, we have to be prepared to, if things don't go well at the 11th hour, to walk into that arbitration room in Toronto and fight for a client.
You can keep names anonymous, but has there been any commentary that surprised you in those conversations or that arbitration process?
Usually both sides know what the numbers would look like. The difference between the UFA, the unrestricted free agents, and RFAs is that in arbitration room they go purely off the statistics. Whereas in the UFA, sometimes a guy could get paid more money because he's extremely valuable to a team, but his stats don't necessarily add up. So there isn't one size that fits all. And so again, we work extremely hard to resolve issues. Usually before the arbitration, the final week before, 2 weeks before the arbitration, there are 20, 30, 40, 50 phone calls exchanged between both sides. And it is hard to keep things not away and not personal. But when you're fighting for the kid, when you're fighting for his family, you get very much involved, and it's very difficult sometimes to separate from hurting because you feel that your client isn't getting a fair deal sometimes.
In early 2022, I have to imagine that the war in Ukraine changed your kind of business in terms of what you were and weren't able to do, in terms of how you normally operated. How did all of that change after that started?
Obviously, it was a very difficult beginning. I received a lot of hatred, a lot of very nasty letters. There was a significant threats towards some of the clients, luckily, the NHL and teams have provided extra security for the families of the players. I mean, just imagine, you're a 6'5" defenseman, and you're not afraid for your life. But when you go on the road to play games and your wife with 2 kids are at home, you're obviously extremely concerned. And so NHL and clubs have done a great job providing extra security for the players. There for a while, the borders were sealed, so we couldn't go and scout and spend more time with the players. So we obviously, I don't know, I shouldn't say thankful, but obviously due to COVID restrictions, we learned how to work by video instead of going on the road, shaking hands and kissing babies. So that helped as well. And then the logistics with visas. I mean, like if you're in Russia right now, I mean, you have to make a pilgrimage. So when I go to Russia to see my clients or on a recruiting trip or scouting trip, I should say, it takes me 25 to 35 hours just to get there. And so obviously, same thing for visas. To get a U.S. work visa, you have to go to the U.S. embassy, but there are no U.S. embassies open in Russia, so guys have to go to a third country, and sometimes you don't know whether they're going to get it or not. So it costs more money, it takes a lot of time, and it's a lot of human capital that's being added. I mean, we've added numerous staff positions to accommodate and work with our clients to receive the visas. And to Fedor Svechkov made the NHL play the first game last week. And his mom was, his dad received the U.S. visa, but his mom was denied the U.S. visa to come in to watch her son play in the very first NHL game. So you have to, sometimes you have to deal with those types of things too. But but we adapt. We add more people to accommodate our players, and in the end, the players are the royalty in our agency. They are they're basically the reason why we wake up every single morning. So every morning I wake up. I polish my begging shoes and I go fight for my clients.
There was a statistic I saw in 2022 that said you represented 75% of the NHL's Russian and Belarusian players. I don't know how accurate that is or what that number looks like today, but has that sort of all been built off your relationship with Pavel Datsyuk, or have you wanted to more so base your business and your player agency around those Eastern European players?
So you basically see, I started out with what I knew, obviously, but at the same time, we have quite a few North American guys. I mean, we put many guys into the draft. It takes a little bit longer to get the guys in North America than to get guys in Russia and Belarus. But Paul Carter, the Stanley Cup champion, we've been working with him since he was 15 years old. We met him at the USHL Combine when he was 15. Obviously, many other guys. Evander Kane turned to us when he had issues with different various on and off ice concerns that we basically started representing him. So now more so than ever before, we're getting more North American clients. But obviously, we started out initially with the Russians and Belarusians, and then opened up the floodgates to everybody else. Very much what I've learned this business by working with one guy, Pavel Datsyuk, for a number of years. Then it was easy to basically what I've learned, what we've done for him, open it up to do the same thing for others from the Russian Belarusian community. And then of course, look, everybody in my agency speaks English. And, we were basically, our agency sends guys back to Europe, and then also we bring quite a few to North America. So North Americans are going one direction, some of them, and then some of them are coming this direction. So it's a win-win.
One of the hot topic items in the NHL over the past maybe two or three seasons has been talking about state income tax and the impact that has on player salary, teams and how they can be competitive in landing star players. What's sort of your perspective on how big of an impact that actually might be? And is there any reason to make adjustments in the NHL to sort of level the playing field?
Very good question. Look, you would say right now to me that taxes in Canada are super high and Canadian players pay 51% or so to the Canadian government to walk away with only 49%. And it's unfair because guys in Florida, Texas, Nevada, and so on, pay zero state tax. So as a result, they pay 30 whatever percent, right? But in Canada, there's a such thing as an RCA, and so you could up to half of your salary could go into the retirement fund, your own fund. So guys essentially pay no tax on part of it, and then when they take the money out, they pay 25%. So collectively, you could still be under, you could still be under 40% for your taxes. So it depends on the situation, depends on the player, but usually Guys, everybody wants to win the Stanley Cup. And so guys look at everybody wants to play on the best team, on the good team that would give them a chance to win. And sometimes they don't look at the tax savings, but there are other things that you could do in order to save the money in Canada. Of course, if you look at the New York and Florida, financially speaking, you could be making on a $10 million deal, you could be making over $1 million or close to that, give or take. Don't quote me on the numbers now, but you could make more by playing in Florida, and perhaps the cost of living is a lot cheaper in Florida than it would be perhaps in Manhattan. But at the same time, you look where you fit, where your family wants to live, where you want to raise your kids, and where you would have a best chance at not only being on the team, but actually helping the team to win. And so usually guys look at those types of things before looking purely at the tax savings. It's always the ability to win, because everybody wants to win the Stanley Cup. It's always the winning, or for the most part, coming in. But also at the same time, Pavel Datsyuk back in the day was one of the first players to ever receive a signing bonus. And I remember Ken Holland asking, it's like, why would you, on his final deal, why would you take a signing bonus? The contract is guaranteed. I said, well, Kenny, we can do one of two things. I could be sitting here and asking for more money, which you don't have. Or plan B, let's do the signing bonus. Pavel puts that same amount of money at his Merrill Lynch bank, and then he gets 8-9% on his money. So in the end, that $7.5 million looks more like an $8 million deal. So same thing could be said. Sometimes you could go to a team with higher taxes, but the structure of the contract would put more money into your pocket if you factor in some of the potential market appreciation too. But like I said, usually you start out is, do I want to play for a certain team? Do I have a chance at winning? Would my family be happy? Would my kids get better school education? Would I be close to my relatives? And then it goes on and on and on. And then of course once you look at all those factors, you do look at the taxes. But I can't remember last time a client basically said, I want to go on the crap team, but I want to go on a tax-free, it always starts with the Stanley Cup. I'm not going to give you a name, but a very prominent defenseman that I have, who has not won the Stanley Cup yet, on his iPhone, the first page is always he opens up and it's a picture of the Stanley Cup. He's got his eyes with his big fat contract on that Stanley Cup. All he cares about is winning the Stanley Cup, because all of his friends have a Stanley Cup and he does not have a Stanley Cup ring. So to him, he didn't select a team based on the taxes. He selected a team where he felt he would have the best chance at winning the cup.
So many questions we could ask you today, but I'll close with one more. We opened by talking about Pavel Datsyuk and the Detroit Red Wings. Let's finish by talking about one of your Red Wings clients, Amadeus Lombardi, who the other night, was putting on a show and dangled some guys, and some poor defender crashed into the boards because he bid on a deke that Amadeus made. Tell us about Amadeus Lombardi, the player, the talent he has, and what you think his future could be.
We see him as a long-term the Detroit Red Wing player. Hopefully he will help the team to get into the playoffs in the very near future, and would be a major part of the team for years to come. I'll never forget the day when we told him he was signing a contract for the Detroit Red Wings. What we usually do is that obviously every drafted player dream is to sign the NHL contract as soon as possible. So we negotiated a contract. We didn't tell him or his dad. We basically invited them separately on a Zoom call to talk about the housekeeping issues about the season, whatever the deal was at the time. And so they got on the phone, and I always start out on those calls by asking, so Amadeus, how would you like to be an NHL player today? And so there was a silence, and then his dad was just crying. It was just the tears, the happy tears. And so you live for those moments, because when you see the difficulty, because he wasn't the kid who got everything. He had to fight and he had to get it all, and he still does it every single day. But to see him and his dad just having that moment, they were apart. One was in Canada, the other one was at his CHL, OHL team at the time. And that moment is what you live for as an agent.
Well, Dan, excited for Amadeus, excited to see what you do when you grow up, as you said, but congratulations again on Pavel Datsyuk and his honors and your role to play in that. It's a great microcosm to what you've done in your own career. And you have various works yourself that we encourage people to check out. It's not just your time as an agent and in your entrepreneurship. You wrote 17 Cents in a Dream. You've been featured with the ABC of Sales, Lessons from a Superstar, Street Smart Selling, How to Be a Sales Superstar, Rule Number 1, Don't Be Number 2. Folks, look it up. Read. Dan Milstein is one of the most interesting and successful people in the sport. Dan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, guys. But I'm going to leave you with one quote. I'm not successful. Success is never owned. It is rented, and the rent is due every day. So every day I wake up and I pay my rent.
Beautifully said. I'm going to tell Evan that the next time he pops in the studio. Welcome back. That was our interview with Dan Milstein. Hope you enjoyed as much as we did. Could have gone on forever asking him more questions, but that seems like a busy, driven man.
Yes, absolutely. It was great, though. It was great talking to him and hearing some of the stories and how he's sort of built his business and his career. It's unbelievable.
It's no wonder that he's been able to have the portfolio he has, but it's funny and really interesting that he could have just decided to stop after Datsyuk.
Yeah.
And that would have been successful in and of itself. But he's like, let's do that, but on a much bigger scale now.
Yeah, I think during the interview, I saw that stat that said in 2022, he had 75% of the NHL Russian players as clients. Just unbelievable.
Yeah, both inspiring, and it makes you feel like you are a degenerate at the same time, relatively speaking.
I didn't need to have that interview to know that.
Okay, let's jump into some quick NHL news here. The David Jiricek wait is over. He did not get traded to the Red Wings, and some folks are saying, good. I was way wrong. I was saying I had a gut feeling that maybe the issues with Jiricek and Columbus were going to translate to them having to sell him for less than what they got. I was off because they got their first round pick and more. The Minnesota Wild acquired David Jiricek and a 2025 fifth round pick from Columbus for Damon Hunt, a 2025 first, a 2026 third, a 2026 fourth, and a 2027 second. So the second round pick isn't for a little while here, but still, that's a decent haul for Jiricek. It's not, what they would have wanted for the player overall, considering how high he was drafted and how high his potential at least was. But I think they escaped disaster here if you're Columbus. It still could go terribly, but you didn't get nothing back.
Yeah, it's degrees of separation that matter here, because where Minnesota's sitting in the standings right now, there's a very good likelihood that first round pick is in the 20s, possibly even the late 20s, because holy crap, Minnesota's on a heater this year. That's not what the Red Wings would be giving up in a first round pick, and pick 22 to, let's say, pick 11 is a substantial difference. A substantial difference. So while I think this was a lot more than I thought Columbus was going to get for Jiricek, it's still a pretty good return, because a first and a second is a good get. Damon Hunt might be a depth NHL defenseman. He's got a chance to play, so that's not nothing. And then a couple throwaway picks going back each way. But it's about as good as Columbus could have hoped. They weren't going to get a top 15 pick for Jiricek, because if he was worth a top 15 pick right now, he'd be playing in Columbus.
I don't think this would have made sense for Detroit, though. Obviously, like you said, Brad, their first and Minnesota's first aren't the same thing, so the values are different. But if you were looking at premium in the first range, plus, like, to me, I would have rather have dealt a roster player. And one that maybe would have been uncomfortable, but I would have rather have built around that. Or you're protecting the hell out of a first-round pick, right? But, look, I'm a big believer in what Jiricek could be, like, in terms of what he was at the time of the draft. I love the player, but you can't see a guy who's not achieved anything yet and say with absolute certainty that he still has that. I'm not a guy who thinks talent goes away from players, but when you're a rookie and when you have injury history and when it's a mobility thing with what's not working with your game, there's no guarantee that he's going to turn out to be a guy. He still has a ton of potential, yes, but I think I'm okay with Detroit passing on this one considering the price. It wasn't as, when you dial in, you're right, Brad, it wasn't as high as maybe it looked at first, but it was still a significant price in my mind.
Well, if it works out, it's one of those trades everyone will look back on like they did with Florida and said, I can't believe other teams didn't make this trade. Like, look at this move. They took a risk on a guy who, it doesn't get around the ice as well as I think a lot of people thought he did. And now he's turned into a star. And maybe this will be a big play for Minnesota, who are unbelievably tied with Winnipeg for the division lead.
This made sense for Minnesota, is what it ends up being. Like, it just made sense for them. They were in the position to do it. Yeah, you can probably draw equivalent value if you're another team like in Detroit's position, for example, but it's much harder to stomach even seeing a first or something like that going the other way. So I agree. If this works out, people are going to be kicking themselves for not doing it, but Minnesota was uniquely positioned where that future made sense for them to give up for the risk. So we'll see. It could also go terribly for them. It's a risk, but that saga's over. He's not the only player that we said Detroit should be trading for, though. So still plenty of tinfoil hat theories to go around. Okay, let's jump into overtime on this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast.
We're going to overtime.
Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to support the show, you allow us to do things like host Winged Wheel podcast nights at the LCA and at Van Andel Arena in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings and the Grand Rapids Griffins, respectively. You get not just access to a pregame live recording of the podcast, including special guests, but you also get special co-branded Detroit Red Wings or Grand Rapids Griffins and Winged Wheel podcast merch. Go to wingedwheelpodcast.com/links to find out more. And again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to join the Dub Club. Some questions from our patrons. Lars Thorzel says, hey boys, well, we lost the Canucks and I think they deserve to win in terms of the Red Wings. This third period cowardice our coaches put forth as soon as we lead by a goal in the third is doing my head in. If our PK is terrible, and it very much is, why on earth would you want to play like you're on the PK, but for 5-on-5 for the last 10 to 15 minutes of the game? It's like ordering a goal against. What do you think about that tactic? I agree, but is it a tactic or is it a function of how bad the team is or what they can manage?
It's a few things can be true at the same time. One, it's natural in the game of hockey and in most sports that the team that's trailing is going to just hammer the gas down offensively because they need to catch up. Just because we haven't watched the Red Wings do that for a bunch of years doesn't mean the rest of the league doesn't do that. So yeah, a team that's trailing in the third is going to have a lot of urgency, which is going to drive more offense. So you're going to play more defense than you would like to, given the circumstance. But it's also true that the Red Wings really do go into a shell and stop pushing. The term that should be used here is risk averse. They don't want to push up ice too hard, create a turnover, et cetera, et cetera. That part of this I don't like because we've seen time and time again, the best way to not give up a goal is to have the puck in the offensive zone. And the Red Wings, not only do they not generate shots in this circumstance, they don't generate offensive zone time. So yeah, when you're sitting back in a shell in your D zone for 10 minutes straight, the odds just dictate one's going to get in. So I do wish they would hammer the gas pedal a little more, but also it's worth keeping in mind the other team is going to be desperate. So this is what's going to happen a lot of the time naturally.
C-Nod says, is it time to be concerned about Joe Veleno's long-term viability on this team? Not really producing, not really a shutdown guy. I think he's on the outside looking in once a few more young guns are ready. We talked about this preseason, and Joe Veleno still has a game to him. I think long gone are the ambitions of him moving, beyond a depth piece, but a competent depth piece. But I think you're right. I think this is a function of the young players needing spots and them earning it, and he's going to have to work with the fringe players on the roster to find his way in. I still think he's one of the most, not because you need to, but just in terms of consequence or circumstance, uniquely positioned Red Wings to be moved because he does have some value.
Yeah, and he's a plug and play guy in the sense that you can put him anywhere in your bottom six and he'll be acceptable in that role. Yeah, I don't think he's going to be an offensive driver. And yeah, he's not an elite shutdown guy, but he's competent. So your third line left winger's out. Yeah, you can plug Veleno in there. Your fourth line center's out. Yeah, you can plug Veleno in there. Eventually, do you want someone better to come in and replace him? That's the dream of a good team, is all the mediocre players right now get replaced. So it's very possible. And if it's through trade because there's some value there, all the better for it.
And it feels harsh on Veleno. Like now it's Veleno. People will be saying it about, Motte or Rasmussen or whatever other bottom six player. It's just a function of the Kaspers, the Berggrens, those guys coming in and earning spots. It's going to get tougher with Danielson and, MBN and these guys coming in later on. But it's also like that's what happens when teams get better from their internal depth. So
It's a good problem to have.
yes, it certainly is. A Wet says, when you guys say it's harder to line match on the road, why is that? I feel like it'd be the same. So you might think it'd be the same, but there's actually a simple explanation. The home team gets last change, which means they get to see who's on the ice for the other team, and then they get to pick their guys to go out. And that's why you see line matching and you hear about the home team having the advantage, and it's way, way, way more pronounced in the playoffs. And that's why coaches have a bigger lens on them in the playoffs, because you're way more intense about line matching when every game matters like that. But yeah, it's simply because the other team can say, oh, you're going to put out this line? Well, I'm going to put out that line. And if you want to try to match against it, it means you have to take the face off and immediately change. And then they can just do the same thing. So
the amount of line changing that occurs within like the first 15 seconds for the away team, if the matchup is bad, is crazy.
Eric Asmus says it was mentioned a couple episodes ago that Johansson doesn't play special teams, so it makes it harder to keep him in the lineup. I understand why he doesn't play the power play, but why not PK? Did he not play PK in Grand Rapids or previous seasons? It's something that I'm sure Johansson can build to, but when a guy is still trying to find the execution and the positioning and the timing that comes with being an NHL defenseman, and he's not doing what Seider or Edvinsson did or are doing, and that's fair. Like, that's not unexpected.
He was never billed to be.
No. Then you want to be careful about putting him in those situations where it might seem like it's asking for him to just get burned repeatedly. You got to think about the player there. That said, that's just the reasoning. Could it hurt to try? I don't think necessarily.
I don't think it could at this point.
Eric, we could put you out there and that wouldn't hurt to try right now.
Well, desperate times, desperate measures. But, mistakes get magnified on the PK because there's one less guy able to provide secondary coverage. And Albert Johansson would be going out against the other team's best 5 players. So that would be punching way above his weight class. And if they're trying to incrementally build his NHL skill set and get him accustomed to the NHL game, throwing him out on the PK right now, although the PK is historically bad, might not be the best for his game.
And with Johansson, it's like, yeah, you want to win games this season and you want to make that wild card spot, but you also want Johansson to stick in the lineup. Yeah. And guys in his position, it is really kind of delicate. They can end up being a nobody and falter out of the NHL and get, moved around from team to team and they're out of the league by the time they're 27. Or they get a foothold. They can build their game incrementally, build that confidence, the understanding of where to be in NHL time and space, get those, typical 200 reps that you think an NHL defenseman needs to really know how to play the game before you can really evaluate him, and have him be a solid everyday lineup player. If you're a Raymond type, if you're a Seider type, if you're an Edvinsson type, you know what they're going to be, and you can throw them out in those situations younger in their career. But when you're a fringe guy, circumstance can dictate whether you make it or not. And that's unfortunate, but this game is very, very, very mental, and you don't want to break a young guy's mental. It's why I talk about, Sebastian Cossa. If you're worried about the goaltending, why not bring up Sebastian Cossa? You bring him in behind this defense and he gets burned repeatedly. Doesn't matter how talented he is. That is now a massive hill to climb mentally. And you've seen goalies get burned time and time again.
Yep.
Okay. Let's wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast. We're going to be recording our Patreon exclusive overtime bonus episode, including the most recent one as well. We're going to be doubling up here as we catch up. But thank you all so very much for tuning in to the Winged Wheel podcast. Thank you to Dan Milstein for joining this episode of the show. Fantastic time talking to him. To all of our sponsors of the Winged Wheel podcast, we can't thank you enough. And to our patrons, this show would not happen without you, whether it's interviewing Dan Milstein or doing anything that we do. Our patrons are the reason we're able to even run the Winged Wheel podcast. So patreon.com/Winged Wheel podcast if you want to support the show. And if you want to support the show, but Patreon's not for you, you can support by subscribing and leaving a rating wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Leave the thumbs up, leave the rating, the stars, tell a friend about the show. It all really helps. To our name level supporters on Patreon, we can't thank you enough. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Whitehead, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Adam Rose, Adam Zoiza, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy. Are we having fun? Asher Killian, Beer League Legend, Best James Bond, Carl Brutina-Nanalewski, Carl Provi, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Instam, Seider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, Future Considerations, Jin Inyusi. I believe Future Considerations may be a brand new name level supporter, unless it's just a new name. Give Blood Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Griffin, God Creatives, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, John Engels, Jonathan Miller, Kalen Wood, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, Mr. Kuzi, R.A., Riley Enright, Roy Donk, Scott Martin, Skeletor, Stephen Ordeleb, That's What I Appreciates About You, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Iser Plan Stan, Aaron Hudson, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, A.A. Ron, A.B., All Motor No Hands, Ann Stanislavski, Antonio Gracias, Axel Sandy Pelica, Bellingham Acid Balls, Bex, Chimkim Nutgits, Commander Ben Baron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Layton, Corey Prita, Darren Fick, DATSYUK'S, Dangleberries, Deep in Seider, Dylan Larkin, Trade Sacrifice, Eric Nance, Evan Beckner, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Grepsky, Griffey Boy, Hey, Dirt A, Baby, I Got Your Chungus. That's so... It was worth it, but you guys are... James Prodmore, Jeremiah Dobo, Jim, JM Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, Josh Yelton, Chaotic Monkey, Keenan O'Donohue, Casper the Unfriendly Ghost, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Larkin's Loyal Lemming, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Lucas Raymond, Mitch Minier, brand new name level supporter. Welcome, Mitch, to the Dub Club. I hope I pronounced your name right. Ophelia, As Good As It Gets, Ryan M, great name, Shawnee, Pat in the Hat, Steven, that other guy, the Hodag, the Hat 123, Trent Thorough, Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. Off to record a couple overtimes.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to visit wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you'll find links to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find ways to support the show, like Patreon, official podcast merchandise, and more. And don't forget to follow us on X at Winged Wheel Pod, at Ryan Hanna, WWP, at Brad Crisco, and at Hockeytown Evan, as well as Winged Wheel Podcast on Instagram.